I've sort of been trying to reconcile your methodology with the memo we have from Cash to where we just were with developer fees. And the numbers don't all support each other entirely. And, you know, if you come up with a mix of projects from schools reporting, for example, you've got your pie chart on how many were school additions and how many were new construction. Do we know if we're comparing that to previous numbers? Are the school additions, are they all adding approximately the same number of classrooms? Or some, I mean, are they adding less now or more before? I mean, how do we know we have a true apples to apples comparison with that?
I'm not sure I have a direct answer for your question. I can tell you a little bit about the data that we collect and how and how we do it. We have when districts come in for a fund release request, and at the first year, districts are required to report at annual intervals after receiving their funds. We collect data on projects at the fund release, which is typically, you know, bids are let folks have got their contracts underway, and the costs are largely estimates at that point. We also collect data at the first year of reporting, where some of the costs should have been firmed up because they're underway, and then we do it at the closeout when the project is over and done with. Those figures should be quite good. There's a good reason for that. We wanted to be able to capture information as we go along, so that to look at this question of whether the grants are adequate or not, it doesn't do us a great deal of good to look backward at a project that was done 7 years ago and try to make an adjustment today. We try to do the best we can with the
I'm just saying, I mean, if we want to say costs went up 10%, are we sure that entire 10% was because of construction cost inflation, or is it because the schools that we're building today are different? You know, I mean, let me just give you an example. If Selmy or Brownlee, when they build their elementary school, if they just build classrooms, an office, a multi-use room, and maybe some offices for support staff, and we decide in our district, well, when we build them, we also want to have a science lab and a computer lab and other facilities, then the cost per student in my school district is going to be higher than the cost in Assemblymember Brownlee. So I'm just curious as to how do we adjust for that so that we're getting
the data we collect captures the size of the facilities, including the components of the facilities, and then that becomes relatively simple to figure out what the student capacity is, the square footage per student, the square footage per facility, as well as the dollars per square foot spent on the facility. You could dive deeper into the data to try to make comparisons between schools with different components in them, but when you can convert it down to the square footage and the square footage per child and the dollars per square foot, you're about as comparable as you're going to get probably in the building world, absent substantial differences in construction types, which we don't capture that. Whether somebody uses steel frame construction or stick built, or you know, a steel roof, or versus a, you know, those are things that we don't capture.
And I appreciate that. But if you, for example, this time included was you have a mix of 2/3 additions, 1/3 new schools, and before you didn't have that same mix, you could come up with very different numbers, right?
You could certainly track over time. You could see. It's been fairly consistent for a long time that 2/3 of the new construction projects that come in our door are additions to existing sites. Don't know the reason behind that, but 2/3, it's been very consistent for the time I've been involved in this program, that 2/3 of the new construction projects are additions.
I just have a couple more questions. I think you made a comment partway through. You're talking about none of the basic auxiliary classrooms are determinative of cost. The biggest is the classrooms themselves.
That's one of the problems, is that a project when you're looking at, like you said, the additions projects, a school district can come in to have a portable classroom or 2 portable classrooms, and they'll get funded the same grant with a school district that has 2 portable classrooms and a full gym. So, and that school district may not have an adequate gym at their site, may not have, some of these subsidiary facilities. So right now, the way the funding model is very simple. It's just number of classrooms is the basically what you get funded by.
Okay, and then let me tell you, one of my problems, we just looked at a developer fee adjustment where we were going down by 1 penny. And if you divide, the potentially, I know it hasn't been passed yet, developer fee by the old, it's a drop of 0.34%. And yet we're talking about the cost of school, which is designed for new construction, correct? I mean, to supplement that. And yet we're talking about a 6.7% decline here. So how do you reconcile those two numbers?
Well, I can tell you how what the effect is and why the developer fee changed the way it did. Last year, I think we actually did it in February, we did our annual construction cost index adjustment for the pupil grants. Okay, it went up 6%. This year, minus 6.74. The developer fee is adjusted every 2 years.
Okay.
It went up 6%. We're just catching up on the index. It went up 6% last year and down a little over 6% this year, and that's why you're seeing it relatively flat. That's all. It's just the same numbers over over 2 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
Couple questions and also input. Just as an aside of what you indicated about 2 classrooms receiving the same as a new school, there is some caveat there in that we also restrict by 60% those 2 classrooms that come in separately. We say you must have hard costs of 60%, whereas on which they probably cannot reach because they're not building those areas. And we don't allow that money to be banked necessarily for future additions that may be necessary on those schools. I think a fundamental issue within our program. So that I think there's there's additional information on that question. The other piece that is I think interesting here as well, we're not looking at a 6% increase with this study. This study was to look at, because AB 127 recognized that perhaps there was a problem with how we converted from a square footage program to a per pupil program, and were we truly funding what was conceptually 50% of project costs at the state level and then the local level with their developer fee component of that. Having lived at the local level, I will maintain that it did not, and that, in fact, over time, the locals have been funding more of the project, and you saw the emotional outreach of that with the people that say, please do not reduce us further, because we never were equal. And I think this is also an opportunity. We continue to have the opportunity to ensure that our schools are schools of longevity. When we cut the costs, we may be cutting 6% now, but 15 years from now, we're contributing 50% more because we built a portable building versus a permanent building that does not have life cycle nor longevity in our system. So we may be cutting our nose to spite our face. We're saving a little bit now, but what have we done, I think, overall, and overall for the state of California, as well as for the liability of schools at the local level. In the same manner that we talked about the developer fee, we did not do an adjustment in 2009 based on any reports. This report is now coming in 2010. So if we had adjusted in 2009 and 2010, what would we, at the maximum amount, we would be at 12, hypothetically, we would be at 12%, is that correct? The maximum amount allowed. We did neither, whereas the developer fee, you saw, it equaled out. We just took a 6.7% cut in the program for 2010 based upon the bid situation that we believe is occurring. Some others don't believe that that's for the future. But we never, in 2009, addressed this issue of, are we truly at a partnership with schools? And I would maintain that we are not. As a state, we have not. Now, whether people think we should or should not be there, I think is a policy consideration ultimately that the legislature will look at. But as we have been in this system, I would maintain we continue to need to look at this issue. In this report, it shows that for permanent buildings, which the program was built upon, I think the unintended consequence of adding on to existing facilities has increased our overcrowded problem. And I would say, has the unintended consequence of how we fund made our schools much larger in California than they are anywhere else in the nation, and or have we added on to existing campuses because that's what we could afford to do, versus be able to build what we know educationally is smaller than 3,000, but some range in there, smaller schools benefit our students educationally. So we've had some unintended consequences here as well. And you look at this report, you look at the permanent construction component of it, we are not at 50%. Just on their numbers alone here, we are at, I think, 37% on a complete school. I don't think this program anticipated simply additions. We anticipated building complete schools, and I think that's where we want to be, both locally and as a state, contributing to life cycle costs for long-term 30-year buildings in our system. So I, for one, think that we need to adjust accordingly on that. But if we may need more time to look at this as well. Just wanted.
So are you recommending we not adjust down since we're not funding 50%?
We already made the adjustment down. That was voted on by this board, the CCI index. This is separate. This, I think, is looking more big picture. The CCI index is an annual adjustment that we are required as a board to do. To me, this report is looking, I think, as they tried very hard to do. We've tried it a couple of times. And I think Mr. Cook is absolutely correct. It's a very difficult task to do. We're going to hear from other people how difficult it is. I know that on the ground, however, that we have had a very difficult time to build quality construction with the percentages that we receive from the state, and that it behooves us to build quality schools, both educationally and, I think, infrastructure capacity-wise, so we're not coming back and fixing those problems 15 years from now.
Sir, did you want to say something, Mr. Cook?
No. Well, I think for the conclusions of the report, frankly, are that the huge variability in the types of projects out there, from wealthy districts to those that don't have funds, to the beauty. One of the great beauties of our program is the local control and the flexibility that it provides. That local control and that flexibility, coupled with a funding model that funds kids, basically, or funds the housing of a kid, versus laying out dollars in construction terms, makes this a really it's just a really challenging thing to figure out what the appropriate level of funding is. It's just simply there are no standards as far as there isn't a set standard that we fund to. We just can't to judge against. And it's we have a lot of data now. We can certainly see what folks are doing, and I hope this this can inform a future bond debate. Certainly, I think that would be the appropriate time to look seriously at the funding model so that we can figure out how we can make it much more explicit, how we can make it drive good outcomes. But it's this is a real simply just a really tough question to grapple with. So.
Any other questions or comments from the board? Public comment, Mr. Duffy?
Thank you again. Two things. Cash did a study on its own, and we've shared that with you. And is that what you were referring to as, or was it newer?
It was I guess it was a study that said elementary schools are 32% underfunded, middle schools 7%, and high schools 41%.
Yes. And we had shared that study last month with the board, or not last month, it was November with the board, anticipating that this item would be discussed. In our study, we approached it differently than the OPSC study in that we believe this program was built on the old program that Josh talked about, which was a square foot model, where within that square footage, a portion of it went to classrooms, toilet rooms, libraries, and the like, ancillary facilities such as gyms, and that the combining the square footage that you receive per child, you then determine for 600 pupil elementary school how you would use that square footage, and that there was flexibility there, except for classroom sizes for the most part. We believe that doing and one other thing, that was looking at building a complete school and building a complete school on a new site. We believe that this study should have been approached in that way, in that the program was really conceived to build complete schools, although there is the option, of course, that's been discussed of building additions. So in our study, we basically screened out the project information worksheets that had projects that were starting early. We only wanted projects that were almost complete, so we knew what those dollars were for the end product. And we utilized schools that involved site acquisition because that site acquisition identifies that it's a new site, new school. So our approach took all the other data and basically left that aside, saying that in so many words, the additions and the other kinds of facilities, the breakouts that Josh has in the study, really don't inform the question of shall we increase the grants by 6%. One other thing that's important to note for you is that there was the discussion of the other costs that are identified that are supplementary. The statute says that the 6% is for the pupil grant. It's not to look at these other costs that basically have come into the program since 1998. So one that was mentioned was the fire and life safety system, which includes sprinklers in new schools. There's an additional cost because when Jack O'Connell wrote that legislation, we said there needs to be a way of paying for that, and we'll pay half, but the state needs to ante. So that wasn't in the pupil grant; it was added on. Access compliance was mentioned. That came as a result of a DSA determination. It wasn't legislation. So there have been things that have been added into the program, and we have argued for cost to cover those. And we think that they need to be segregated out of the study and look only at the pupil grant. And you read off the numbers that we had, the 32% differential for elementary, 7% for the middle school, and 41% for high schools. We took the OPSC study and analyzed that, and I don't think you have a copy of our letter on that, but I will give you one. And a couple of you just, I think, didn't get a chance to really digest that. But we looked at the OPSC study and felt that there was something that was wrong. We had different view of how to approach it, but saying, okay, let's look at their numbers and see if we agree with what comes out. Well, in the document that has a chart in it that looks like this, we discovered that there was an error in our view of how you approach the study, in that the projects, and these are all 166 projects that Josh mentioned, the projects are identified there, and then they're divided out by numbers of projects which give a false percentage. So the one that we're showing here is the K-6 portable additions, which were at about $4.7 million, represented, according to the OPSC data, 12%, when in essence, if you divide by value of the projects, not by number, it's just a little over 0.5%. In comparison, there's a 7-8 permanent new site, and the total apportionments were 272, almost 273 million. Their value in the blue, according to the OPSC information, is at 11% as compared to portable additions at 12, when really the permanent new sites is 31.60%. If you take all of that and aggregate it and look at what has the state paid of those 166 projects, that's what's in yellow. It's the 37.5%, the bottom, whereas the OPSC information says that it's almost 47.5, which we believe is not accurate. So we believe that using the OPSC information, if you were to do that, supports a 6% increase, as I noted before, for 2009, and this is supposed to be retrospective. I'm not sure of how you want to approach 2010.
Mr. Harvey?
I need some help in understanding some of the terms. You use the term complete school,
Yes.
and in your letter you say that when you talk about the additions, those shouldn't be part of a complete school, even though they do things like sprinklers and handicapped access and things that I think make a complete school. You go on to argue that really what you have to do is make sure it's the libraries and the gymnasiums and the science labs and the other things that, by your definition, apparently is a complete school. I'm having difficulty understanding what a complete school is, and what I don't want as a policymaker is to simply say the state should pay half of whatever a district decides to build, in that the definition of complete can be, you know, I'll say this pejorative, the Taj Mahal, as opposed to something that really is about educating kids in the proper environment. So the thing I'm wrestling with is trying to understand the public policy reason for why it went to per pupil. I can see it seems like it was an effort to say we're not going to worry about all this other stuff the districts may want to do. We really want to know what it's going to cost to put an individual, no matter where they may be, in their seat. So that sounds logical, but I'm really confused about what a complete school is and how I, as a policymaker, should be factoring whether additions are part of that or they're not part of that, and how we really make sure the state is not overpaying for what someone decides is the complete school.
Mr. Harvey, during the latter part of 2003 through 2004, 5, 6, and beyond, school districts being funded through the program here on pupil grants were frequently not building complete schools, although the California Department of Education had approved their plan for 30 classrooms, a library, toilet rooms, and the like, because of the bid climate at that time. So they frequently, and that kind of data, I think, is important because of the ebb and flow of construction costs. So districts frequently took plans that CD approved, put them in a corner, basically did the grading, called a modular manufacturer and said, can you replicate with classrooms what we have here? And we don't have enough money to provide the library and the other ancillary facilities, except maybe toilet rooms. That was a reality. There were appeals before the board asking for additional funds because of the full and final apportionment statutory language, that those were denied. They were denied outright, although the board listened and said, you know, we wish we could help you. So this program was constructed in such a way, and it came out of SB 50, as we said. I'm recalling that it was Bill Leonard who came up with the idea of the per pupil grant, saying, can't we come up with a simple way and make this a simpler program? There were there were complaints about OPSC at the time, and they were saying, can't we get it through faster and give districts more discretion? So the question has come up, well, should we have a different means of paying for additions on sites if districts are not going to be building the expensive ancillary facilities like gyms and libraries and toilet rooms, if they're building simply classrooms? Well, you have a mechanism in your policy that basically controls for that. It's called the 150% rule, and it's been an issue before you in the past. That's because it was recognized that if districts want 2 classrooms worth of pupil grants at the elementary level, that would be 50. And if they can build more than 2 classrooms with that amount of money, your policy allows them to do that up to a certain number. So there are program issues related to the school facility program that have negatives for districts and have positives for districts depending upon what they're building and what they can add into the cost of the project. But for purposes of this study, we believe that if you just use OPSC's data and do the sort that we did, correcting the error, it shows that you should increase the grants by 6%. If you want to look at our studies have definitely look at a different kind of facility, because it's saying let's look at a complete school when it's done, when the project's pretty much closed out, and you know what you've spent on those change orders, you know what you've spent on what you found underground that you didn't know when you did your borings, that kind of thing. So we see that using OPSC's data, you could increase by 6%. If you wanted to increase by more than that, you can look at our data set.
Assemblywoman Fuller.
Well, here's the deal. We've been sitting here a really long time. We have lots of agenda items to go, and I really appreciate all the discussion, but the problem here remains twofold. One, on this agenda item, we've already approved the grant, right? We've already approved an adjustment to the pupil grant. We've done that, right? No.
No, we haven't.
Okay, so we're
did the,
going to restate that question shortly, and we're going to do that. Okay. Meanwhile, all this other stuff is about how we arrive at the grant. And I think Rob's first statement, if we decide that we are going to change the grant or do research, and I agree with you, I think we've heard complaints forever about the adequacy of the grant. We don't have a definition of complete school that everybody agrees to. So at the bottom of the day, this board has to appoint someone to do whatever it is in a different section, not in a board meeting, that comes up with that. Personally, I like the good old days. You had X kids, you got X classrooms, and you got X% to augment for the cafeteria and the library, whatever you wanted to choose, but you got X% of the building to choose. And then, yes, we probably need to put over here, and you get X% over that for all of the new CEQA and other stuff that we have to do. And at the end of the day, that gave us flexibility. Now we have gone down to all kinds of pricing and flexibility and 16 different ways of looking at things. And so we're arguing about every single thing in every single meeting, and all these poor people are coming here and having to be put over and put over and put over. So I would like to call for the question on this and have it restated by Lisa or whomever as to what it is that this particular item requires tonight. And I would like another agenda item at another point that Lisa and Rob and maybe the chair get together and say, here's some options for studying this or resolving this question, task force, special meetings, whatever, but some process outside of a regular board meeting agenda, because this is too big a question. We've argued about it now for 6 months, and we're not getting anywhere. And then thirdly, I think that we should probably just stop trying to say whether it's adequate or not, because I think we all have our opinions on that, and we should come up with the next question, which is, pretty soon we are going to be out of money entirely. That's a way bigger issue than this. Like, we're going to have no money. And right now, my experience with level 3 fees is that when it goes to a level 3 fee, everybody's so dead in your district, they leave you or they can't build, so there's no money coming in. So that's no help at all. If we go to level 3, we're done. in my opinion, and especially in this climate. So let's start out with the questions in order, which is, one, when we run out of money, what are we doing? And let's have a task force or whatever we're going to do to come up with some legitimate ideas, and that should be some Rob, Lisa, the chair issue. And then two, after we come up with that, at what point do we need this question revisited is a pretty easy answer, and that same structure could come up with the options we could consider. So thank you, but I think we should move on.
Senator Hancock?
I would agree with that, and I don't think we need to make a motion on it, but simply suggest that maybe we need to bring in some outside people, or Rob, or, whoever could look at that. I don't know if the LAO has the technical capability, but they might be able to look at these reports and suggest some things. And then there is the University of California, it's
Center for Cities and Schools.
yeah, Center for Cities and Schools that looks at these things. They sent us a letter saying they had some suggested changes to the OPSC report too. So when we look at it, I think it would be helpful to the board if there was some consensus in terms of concrete recommendations of a different way to do it that would be simple and easy for schools to use. Other than that, I agree, our problem is going to be more money and how we, in a situation where there is inadequacy in almost every level of funding at the state, we deal with this particular level of inadequacy.
Can I call for the question and have somebody restate?
But there is.
Well, I think the problem is
there
I
a
don't,
question.
I think we don't have an answer to the question.
What is the actions that we're asking for
The-
on this voting item?
They're asking, we're being asked to, whether or not we want to adjust the per pupil grant amount. And there's not a recommendation of an amount, so we can go any level. This presentation was to try to get us to feel comfortable setting a level. I, for one, share your frustration. I don't know what adjustment. I'd probably just leave it at this point. But the three of these items are all interrelated, and I don't know the answer. Rob? Short.
Keep it nice and short. There is no right answer. There just isn't.
Okay, so here's what I think. Okay. What is the date, Rob, that we need to know this by, this information? Because this is a he said, she said report issue that's never going to end. We need a process. We don't have any process.
Well,
Okay, if we don't do anything for 4 months or a year, that's a problem?
no,
We don't do anything for a month.
This is strictly discretionary on the board. The board is not obligated to take any action whatsoever on this.
And we can, if we take an action for 5 or 6 months from now, it would be retroactive to this point? It could be retroactive to
It
this
could
point?
be made retroactive to this point.
Then how about this? Let's have someone, your committee or whomever, recommend a process that comes forward to resolve the he said, she said massive reports and a timeline for us. And maybe that gets run through the implementation committee so everybody in the audience can comment
I
on it
second
before it
that
comes
motion.
back.
Yeah.
What is this motion now?
I think we give it to the implementation.
I believe I heard your motion to be table the item tonight and have them come up with a process and bring it back at a future meeting.
And have the implementation committee do that?
Yes.
Look at it. Okay. Then, quickly, Mr. Harvey.
A very quick question. Our staff report indicates that there was a category of student, the special day class non-severe and special day class severe, that inadvertently had been left out of the calculations effective January 1st of this year. They're back in. By tabling or postponing, are we doing anything to not recognize what could be an adjustment for them? And should we do something about a 6% adjustment on them to make them whole to what others had received earlier when they were inadvertently left out?
We can, if this board wants to keep this question open, any apportionments we make, which we would be making some next month, could be held open, would be held not full and final until the question is resolved, which means that the population that you described could be held harmless in that.
That's all. Thank you very much.
Okay. So moving on to item 17. Who's presenting on this, Rob?
Jason Hernandez will be presenting this item from our staff.
I know.
Where is what numbers do you want?
Okay, go ahead, Jason. Oh, can we just do this real fast? I don't think this is. Since he's here, let's do 17 and then we'll do 25. Okay. Trying to keep us, let's keep going. Jason.
Okay. Well, good evening.
The other one, Jason.
This item 17.
Good evening. Again, my name is Jason Hernandez, and I'm the audit supervisor for the financial hardship team for the Office of Public School Construction. This item was brought back from the November SAB meeting, if you remember. And my program, the financial hardship program, is the one program that a district can potentially get up to 100% state funding instead of the standard 50-50 for new construction or the 60-40 for modernization. The basic premise of the hardship program is that you first have to meet what some of us call the light switch. You have to meet the qualifying criteria for hardship. And there's 4 basic criteria. Is it a smaller school district with a total bond capacity of less than $5 million? Is it a district that's bonded to at least 60% of their total bonding capacity? Have they passed the Prop 39 bond for the maximum amount within the last 2 years from the date they file for financial hardship? Or if you're a county office of education, you meet that light switch or that qualifying criteria automatically. If you don't meet one of those 4 qualifying criteria, you do have the option to present under other evidence to the board, and that's what the big items here before you today is. Just a quick recap also. We went over the qualifying criteria, the amounts of the requests that we are considering for the bigs. It's a total estimated state apportionment of approximately $3.1 million, an estimated financial hardship apportionment of $2.096 million, leaving a total estimated project cost of approximately $5.2 million. Some of the special circumstances, 4 bigs that they reported to us, one being that back in 2008-09, under their first interim report, they had a negative report from their county office of education under AB 1200. One thing to also consider, too, is that by their third interim report, they had moved from a negative through cuts and other things that I'm sure the district could explain better than I could to a positive. But as part of that, the COE said in a letter to OPSC as part of the package they submitted that even though they did make it to a positive determination for the third interim report, the district could not handle any additional debt such as COP. And also, the district had attempted 2 general obligation bonds, I believe, through 2008, and both those measures had not passed. I think they had both narrowly failed in the area. So that was the basic premise of the request. One of the things the board had asked the district last time was to come back with a list of projects. You can see the list of projects that the district submitted on stamp page 313, and that basically almost pretty much mirrors the projects that I had listed on the first page on 309, but it goes into a little more detail as far as what those projects encompass. I know one of the an item that was brought up by one of the board members, an area of concern, so to speak, was that if this item was approved under the criteria that the district would not have made a reasonable effort, which is one of the basic premise of the financial hardship program, that you're making a reasonable effort to fund your projects. This could potentially open up the door or set precedent for other districts to come in under the same criteria by not actually qualifying for hardship, and potentially set a precedent and have a liability for the district. That is basically the real quick recap in a nutshell. I can answer any additional questions that the board may have, and obviously then I'm sure the district as well would like to come up and further present their case.
Is there anyone here from the district?
Hi, I'm Bill Cornelius, Superintendent of Biggs Unified School District. Per your request, I provided a list of district modernization needs, and I'd like to reiterate that we have been working very closely with OPSC since 2006 to pursue approval of financial hardship status based on other reasonable effort, and have done everything suggested by the OPSC, including 2 bond elections. The district has made all reasonable efforts to impose all levels of local debt capacity and developments through levying the maximum developer fee justified under law, and its attempt to pass 2 bonds. Based on this information, we'd like to request approval of option 2. Thank you.
Is there any questions, comments from the board? Senator Hancock?
Thank you. I am going to simply make a motion that we approve the staff recommendation. We talked about this last time. If you can qualify for hardship because you didn't pass a bond, why would any community pass a bond?
Is there a second? Call the roll.
I'd like discussion before we vote.
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Okay, before we get too much further, I agree that this community needs to pass a bond. There's no doubt about it. I agree with that. However, what I disagree with is that when I look at this list, replace leaking, deteriorating roofs, install fire alarm to meet current codes, modernize heating and ventilation systems, bathrooms ADA compliant, and then we go down here to remove hazardous materials, replace 20-year-old portable classrooms, modernize phones, and when you look at the schools, you will see that the schools are, one, built in 1950. I believe that means they are approximately 60 years old because I was born in 1950, and I feel in need of some rehab myself. And so I think that
You don't offer that.
while this district does need to pass bond, number 2 gives them the flexibility, because look how small they are. When you're a school that size, you don't have any other money you can pull. How are they going to fix their leaking roofs? I don't think anybody in here wants a school to have leaky roofs, un-ADA compliant bathrooms, which they will be sued for by the first severely handicapped student that they get, and we will all be paying for that, etc. If by doing option 2, that gives them the chance to go out and pass the bond and say to their people, look, you guys, we're not going to get anything at all, but we're going to get this hardship money if you pass it, and maybe get them over the hump. Otherwise, we have kids going to a very unsafe school situation. Now, you should have passed a bond, but your people didn't do it. I understand that. If we say no, then there's approximately $70,000 that's been identified that's supposed to fix all those things. I don't know what the hazardous material is, but that alone is probably more than $70,000 according to the other statistics. So I don't know where you can go. I don't know what you can do. I don't know how we can fix it. So by 2, we invest a little bit of money in them and give them a chance, but at the end of the day, they lose if they don't pass the bond. So I will not be voting yes on this motion, but I agree with part of its intention.
Senator Hancock, anything? Okay.
Is
All right.
that a substitute motion?
Yes, thank you.
Is there a second for the substitute motion?
Does it have to be accepted by the original motion? Yeah, I don't think that.
Okay.
I'll second the motion, and if substitute motion, gets acted on separately, back to the primary motion.
If it isn't passed, you go back to the first. So which motion are we on?
We're on the substitute motion. Option.
Doesn't she get to go first? No. You vote on yours first.
And then if it doesn't pass,
Then you go back to one.
Go ahead, call the roll.
Senator Lowenthal?
this is on substitute motion.
Yeah, option 2.
No.
Senator Hancock? Senator Huff?
Aye.
Assemblymember Fuller? Assemblymember Brownlee? Assemblymember Buchanan? Kathleen Moore? Cynthia Bryant?
Aye.
No, it fails.
Fails, okay. Back to the original motion.
It was a 5-3 vote. It needs 6.
Go ahead.
Senator Lowenthal?
This is the original motion.
Option 1.
Number 1. Aye.
Senator Hancock? Senator Huff? Assemblymember Fuller? Assemblymember Brownlee? Assemblymember Buchanan? Kathleen Moore? Cynthia Bryant?
No.
Is Mr. Harvey
No.
coming back?
Yeah. Okay, then let's, well, now I don't know which item we're leaving open. I guess we're leaving. I thought he was, I didn't know his,
When you have a substitute motion,
You have to use the mics.
okay, we'll leave, we're leaving, I think we're leaving the substitute motion open. Although I guess I said motion failed. I'm sorry, my Robert's Rules of Orders are fuzzy here.
You can redo a third motion.
We can have Mr. Harvey make the motion when he comes back. Okay, item 25 for Senator Lowenthal.
we're having so much fun at these meetings. Item 25 has to do with the frequency of SAB meetings, and it's really considered an informational item. I believe that the change in SAB meetings has to be an action item because this board has not a recommendation and then it goes forward. A little background. I really believe that the role of the board and these board meetings really provide the transparency and the accountability. And as you see, there are very serious kinds of issues that come up. I also believe that OPSC says that their workload is very difficult for them to have meetings every month because of the furloughs that are taking place. I have since, and remember, this first came to us, this board, for those new members in September 10th, where we received a notification that the SAB meetings, the State Allocation Board meetings, would be reduced to every other month. We sent a memo to, when we received that, to the executive officer opposing the reduction and asking them that this topic be included in an agenda. I then heard, in October, there was a memo that was sent by the chair to board members, further asserting that there would be a reduction in board meetings because it was necessary. I then sent a letter asking for, before we take that action, could you look at other workload prioritization to reprioritize other workload and provide us with options before we take this as the only way to deal with this issue. We then received a letter back that's telling the necessity of it, but never dealing with whether the OPSC could provide us with other options besides reducing the numbers. There now, the option is to have just the consent calendar every month, a meeting, and not have the full board meeting till every other month.
I still believe that what we need to do is to first agendize this. This has to be an action item. We make the decision about whether the kinds of the numbers of our board meetings. And the second one is to present us with some options. Right now, there have been no options presented. And we know that there are options. The administration itself is moving people. We know the executive officer has a second job now. And so there are reallocations of resources and reprioritization. We need to hear those, whether it's possible. If it's not possible, then the board will act accordingly. Right now, we don't have the slightest idea whether there are options that are available to us. So I say, accept this item today as an informational item, agendize it as an action item, and provide us with options for our next meeting.
Mr. Cook, do you have any thoughts on this?
We had a bit of a discussion on this earlier, and the letter sent out in September was a recommendation to the board, certainly in recognition that as a result of furloughs, literally 36 working, roughly, it turns out about 3 months worth of time, working days, is actually taken out of our calendar. That's like working almost partway into October and then taking the balance of the year off. And we have a board that is, Bagley Keene noticed. We have production cycles associated with it. We have workload that we've got to figure out, and I've got to figure out how to drop 8 new assignments into what we'd already planned for future boards as a result of tonight's actions, and simply fewer work days. As far as project application, as we discussed with the senator earlier,
Tremendously.
Project applications have dropped somewhat, although folks still want their place in line. And processing applications and getting those to the board isn't where the real pinch point is in the organization. I mean, it'll lengthen out because there's fewer work days to get the job done, but it's just setting a cutoff date. What really takes the real time and is highlight just tonight's discussion are working through very complex policy matters and a relatively small staff that are dedicated to that portion of the operation. Much of the staff is dedicated to process application, audits, accounting, and those take up a substantial portion. But working through high performance, we work through seismic, coming up with some of these other things. Take a relatively highly skilled individuals and a relatively small pool of those folks to try to get these things resolved so that we can bring something forward to the board.
Do we have our next meeting set? Is it
the
next meeting? Is it March, whatever's in this memo, March 24th? Is there anything before then?
I think the item is, I think it's noted in here as March 24th.
Again, we did not vote on that. They just decided on that.
So is there a February meeting on people's calendars or not?
It is not currently set on this calendar.
Okay, this is where I'm in a place where I am new to this job, and Rob and I had the briefest conversation about this item, and so if the board will indulge me, I can work with Rob and we can talk through the workload questions. We can be a subcommittee of 2. We can talk about it. I don't know this well enough, and it's getting late, and I don't know what the right answer is.
But we're not taking any action tonight because this is not an action item. It's listed as an informational item, and this board has to decide this, not.
When its next meeting is?
That's right.
We could set a meeting. Do we know? I mean,
traditionally we have met. Traditionally we have met monthly. With one exception, the November-December meeting has always been combined. So we've traditionally met 11 times a year. And I think what the senator is saying is that until such time as the board acts to change that, it should be that course, which would mean that we would meet on the 4th Wednesday in February. I don't know what that date is. February 24th would be our next meeting, at which time it could be agendized for action should the board determine to change it.
okay. I would consider not coming at all. Just FYI, no, I'm just kidding. Okay, then, I was thinking about, I like bi-monthly. Yeah, anyway, so can we set a February 24th meeting? And then
We
can-
we certainly can, and frankly, we were going to propose doing a February meeting anyway, because based on the policy decisions made by this board tonight, we can actually start funding we can actually allocate real money on the 24th.
Okay.
We were already going to
And then we can
propose
work
that.
on this calendar question and bring it back for a complete discussion then, and whether or not we want to change it. Okay, all right, we'll do that.
But we
And
would
then-
like to hear some options. That-
Right.
And
Got-
just
here.
hate to confuse issues, the same question has been applied for the implementation committee.
Yes.
Which has been set by OPSC for every other month. I, as your employee, seek direction from you, because although I may be the chair, OPSC staffs it. Our next implementation committee is next Thursday, but we wouldn't have another one till April unless you then tell us to stay the course and plan one from February and for potentially March, because if we wait till the February meeting of the State Allocation Board, 1 week time to prepare the next implementation committee is not enough.
So I would like then, as part of this motion to agendize, to also continue the implementation committee meeting until an action item there is brought to, also to the board.
Well, isn't the implementation committee set its own agenda?
But they're unilaterally saying they're going to cut those meetings.
Well, who's on the implementation committee?
As chair, and then stakeholders. And it was set up by the State Allocation Board to be a kind of policy reference guide to look at regulations for the State Allocation Board.
But OPSC staffs it, do they not? So
Correct.
we're, again, talking about impacting OPS staff as it relates to putting together our agendas. You're now meeting every other month?
No, meeting every month.
No, we were actually on an every other month schedule with the implementation committee.
And I would say you stay the course there as you are here.
One thing I really simply have, on behalf of my staff, we have had a 15% reduction in workforce, but we have had, you can't reduce the available man hours on, people hours, and expect the same outputs. You just can't do that. I'd be happy to come forward with options, but we literally have had 36 work days taken, 3 months worth of work taken out of our schedule. Something's got to give. I can burn out my staff. I have tremendous turnover, and they can go someplace else and not deal with the same schedule. They do have that flexibility within state service, but fundamentally, as we were looking at this, and I'm more than happy to share with you what we're trying to do with the organization, we're running with those 3 days knocked out of our schedule. We're running into deadlines that just are not sustainable. It was tight when we had 2 furlough days. It's impossible at 3, and something's got to give. And so I'm more than happy to try to come up with options, but something has got to give.
Just as a solution, the committee is already scheduled to meet, correct? And they won't meet again, it wouldn't have met again anyway before this discussion happens, just included in the discussion. It's already scheduled to meet,
February and
In
then again
February.
in April.
Okay.
but it can be included in the February discussion of the
You're already planning to meet in February, right? And then
And then again in April. We may meet in March on other issues if you directed to give us on single issue, if need be,
okay,
but.
we can deal with that in the February 24th meeting as well. Did you have comments on this item?
I did.
Okay.
Thank you. Again, Madam Chair, members, Tom Duffy for Cash. We support Senator Lowenthal's idea of, first, that this board has always met on a regular schedule, as Ms. Moore said, except in the month typically of November. Ironically, the board met in November last year. The idea of discussing it among you as board members, I served the board for 12 years. The board told me when they wanted to meet. I didn't necessarily always want to be there because it got late, but I was there. The idea of options and just one option, and you representing finance, Ms. Bryant, we had issues with DSA not necessarily being able to accommodate a lot of the processing needs because of the 3-day furloughs. There was a relaxation of that for DSA. They were also able to hire additional staff. DSA is paid by school districts by fees. So it's not general fund. In fact, the finance borrowed money from that fund to support the general fund last year. So we argued that there's a different source of funds. We can argue the same thing for Rob and his staff. Why don't we give them back those 3 furlough days, because they're being paid out of state bond funds that we apparently have in order to support that office. So we've heard from school districts for over the last year that there is continuing slowing down at OPSC, except in a couple of areas where they've ratcheted up. But the processing time, and if it is the issue of the furlough days and the continuity of staff and even staff morale, we recommend that to you because it's a different source of fund than the general fund. Thank you.
Thank you. The governor's budget includes a proposal that would change the furlough for the state in July. So, and the governor's policy on the furloughs is pretty clear in terms of what doesn't, the fund source is irrelevant. So, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
And by the way, I do really appreciate this work of the staff. Just, it is amazing what people in the state are doing in these terrible times. So I just thank you, all of you. Anything else on that item?
I'd like to say something.
Assemblymember Brownlee.
Thank you. I just, want to say to the staff that I certainly do understand the deficit that you've been working under, and but I support what Mr. Lowenthal is asking for, and I think we're asking, you to go back and to see where, are there other areas, within the operation that we could cut? Mr. Duffy has, I think, come up with a good option as well that we could consider, but I think at this juncture in time in our state and our economy, and again, I want to underscore, I understand the amount of time that has been taken away through furloughs, but not only do we need to move the money that we have through to the schools, because we need schools, and we need new schools, or we need modernized schools, but we also need to get Californians back to work, and it's important, I think, at this juncture in time, given our economy, that we, with any agency, quite frankly, with any projects that are sort of in the pipeline in California, that we collectively, as a legislature and as a state, that we need to look at all of those projects and push them out the door as quickly as we possibly can to get people back to work. So I think it sort of serves as a dual purpose. And then I'd also like to say as well, in terms of the meetings that we do have, it seems as though every time we have a meeting, we end up tabling a whole lot on the agenda because we don't have time to deal with all of the issues. And so I think that there's perhaps a happy medium in there too, where if we were meeting on a regular basis, that we could get back to the work at hand that we've tabled because we haven't been able to address it if we had it, and that wouldn't require, any additional work, from your staff. So I just wanted to express my support for Senator Lowenthal on this issue, and I think we're here. Again, these meetings are important to move projects through, but it's also important that the school districts up and down our state know what we're doing so that they can prepare and have as much information as possible for planning purposes down the road as well. So, thank you.
Ms. Bryan.
Okay. Senator Hancock.
Just briefly, I don't know if we've discussed the possibility of meeting every month to have a consent calendar to move money when we have money to move, and that we do every other month for policy discussion, and we really try to set aside some fairly serious blocks of time with specific recommendations, like some of the things we have here, to discuss. But maybe, Rob, you could think about that next, so that we could both move the money, create the jobs every month, but keep the long discussions to every other month.
Yeah, that actually would meet much of the concerns, I think, of some of the folks have raised, that they want to make sure that we're processing those applications. And a consent agenda is not that, it's certainly a fair amount of work and folks are working on it, but that isn't where the pinch point is in our organization. So it's working on the things that you guys spend a lot of time discussing, because, as you know, they're really complicated. And there's a fair amount of work that goes into even getting them to that point, not making it more complicated.
All right, well, we will work on this issue. I think you're all really clear on what your thoughts are on it. Back to items. I've lost my numbers here. 17, whichever Biggs is.
Yes.
So,
Ms.
Biggs-
Bryant,
Yeah.
I do have a request, I guess, for Ms. Jones or Ms. Irwin. It is my understanding that under Robert's rules, if a motion fails, that it needs to be brought up by somebody who is not on the prevailing side. And sometimes we get very out of order in here. We don't really follow specific rules, but it does seem to me that this probably ought to be tabled, and that somebody might want to bring it back next time. But we had two motions, both of them failed, and unless
we can put it.
prevailing
We can
side.
just put it off.
Or I believe because Mr. Harvey did not vote on either side, he may substitute, make a third motion,
Okay.
per Robert's rules.
Okay. Well, under Robert's rules, can I tell him what happened, or does he?
I could hear the discussion. Does that make a difference?
Why didn't you come running back in then?
He can make the motion.
Yeah, so he can make, well, if we return to that item,
He can make a substitute.
Are we returning to that item?
I'd be happy to let him return to that item.
Thank you.
Well, can you double check, Teresa?
I wasn't able to find that rule in Roberts right here. And I know that that's one of the issues, or one of the items that's on the agenda as far as adopting rules and procedures by this board.
I move that item.
So we don't really we're not really operating under any particular set of rules. I know the legislature usually uses Masons. I don't know what Masons permits.
Yeah, I don't either.
Yeah, but Masons doesn't apply to this kind of governing board.
I think we have a couple. I mean, we have a couple options here. I mean, we know that it hinges on Mr. Harvey, so we can ask. We can hear from him. We could put this item over. I sort of hated doing that because it seems like we have a bad habit of putting things over. And Biggs is here. They drove down, so I was trying to just get their item off one way or the other, if we can. But it's, you know.
If I may then, and we're on this item, I would move option 2.
Ms. Bryant, I am going to
Senator
speak against option 2, and I want to do this for the record.
We need a second, don't we?
I would like the second.
And that is that if a school does not meet the hardship criteria, and yet we are going to pay 100%, even if it's the planning money, I believe we are saying essentially we have no rules and no standards. And I hope that any school that comes and says, gee, our roof is leaking and we can't get a bond passed, so we want you to pay 100%, will get the same treatment from this board, because that is not what we have done. And if that qualifies as hardship, there are going to be a lot of other districts coming in, and I would suggest, frankly, that we then change our policy to saying, come and tell us you can't pass a bond, and that will be enough, and we will pay 100% of your costs of rebuilding. And I understand that option 2 is only covering planning for the rebuilding, but I think this is setting a very, very bad precedent for all the districts, many of them with many low-income people and many very old schools who stepped up to the plate time and again and pass school bonds and tax themselves so that they could come to this board and get funding for their schools.
I don't disagree with most of what you've said, except that it's pointed out in the binder that Monterey and Needles were exceptions to this rule in the past. And this is a fairly new ruling. The other reasons was, as you know, just passed last year, was I think Karen Bass and Kevin De Leon's bill that changed the criteria entirely, that allowed different criteria to be brought forward, and we're just been moving through that, and that was the whole purpose of that bill, which I voted against because I liked the more strict standard that we had in the past. But we are where we are now, and when I look at, we've already done it for sort of 2 schools, not completely the same, true, but very much the same. And we have passed a looser standard overall for all schools to use a lot of different criteria that are much looser to come forward. And at the end of the day, when I look at this school, we're going to have the school in our lap one way or the other down the road. So I'd rather take the halfway measure. And remember, I'm a Republican. I don't even like halfway measures. I would never normally be on option 2. I would be on option 1. We're actually doing the opposite of what we would normally do. But in this case, I see absolutely no option to deal with this school any other way because of their size. My experience dictates to me their size, their location, their issues, and the process that we have imposed is so terribly confusing. They probably have some little teacher superintendent. So I advocate for option 2 at this time. Thank you.
Assemblymember Brownlee.
Thank you. With all due respect to my colleague and her statement, to support Senator Hancock's statement and going back and reading the comments on this agenda, both Needles and Monterey, in terms of their hardship, they had other extenuating circumstances that were not consistent with what the issues, I believe, are here. Monterey had to deal with the closure of Fort Ord and the loss of $10 million annually in federal impact aid, and Needles Unified had to relocate off of federal land because of the Colorado River Indian tribe. So I think they're sort of a different set of circumstances, with all due respect.
That's fine. I totally, at the end of the day, we're all trying to help schools in our own way.
Call for the question.
Roll call.
Senator Lowenthal.
No.
Senator Hancock.
No.
Senator Huff. Assemblymember Fuller.
Aye.
Assemblymember Brownlee.
No.
Assemblymember Buchanan. Scott Harvey.
Aye.
Kathleen Moore.
Aye.
Cynthia Bryant.
Aye.
Passes.
Okay. Where are we?
One really quick, we never closed action on the minutes.
Yeah, we did. We have actually 2 items open. We have the minutes, which is item number 2, and then I think item number 15 was on call. Do we?
That's correct.
So why don't we go ahead and lift the calls on both those items? Item 2, we left that open because some of you weren't here quite yet approving the minutes. And we needed another vote, so that's right.
You could vote on the minutes.
Can we roll call on the minutes first? We got people ready to vote.
Yeah. Yeah.
Senator Lowenthal.
This is on the minutes.
This is on the minutes, approving the minutes.
Those that were already recorded, you don't need to reread.
Yeah, I've already voted on the minutes. It was on call.
We just didn't have enough people here. Oh, we didn't vote. No. We didn't even
Oh,
vote.
the minutes?
No. Yeah.
So actually, why don't we just
All I recorded
why
was
don't we
the
do a
people who
voice vote?
abstained.
We could just do a voice vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? How many abstentions? I'm abstained. 1, 2, and Senator Huff. So 3 abstentions. So you got it. Okay. Item 15, that was on call. That was the developer fee question. Do you want to call the roll?
Wait, which one is that? What are we voting on?
Item number 15, it is the developer fee, the index adjustment to the developer fee.
And did we not vote?
And the motion was option 1, of which there were only 4 that voted and the rest abstained or were not here.
On item number 1.
Under item number 15.
Tab 15 on the development.
I'd like to make a substitute motion then, because it only had 4 votes. And the substitute motion would be to keep the developer fee at the same level as where we started at the 08 level, which was the CCI California Cities of $2.97. That's exactly where we started from. We're not going to raise it
I'm willing
or
to
lower it.
withdraw my motion and accept yours.
Right, let's just keep it at the same.
Okay, want to call the roll on the,
Is there a second?
is there a second? I'm sorry.
I'll second it. I just wanted to discuss it for a minute, though,
Okay.
if we could. I support the motion, but just one thing that I was thinking about was that on the CCI that we voted on, we didn't not vote on that. We voted to reduce that figure.
Right, for the, just for the, those that were
Correct.
January
Right.
1.
But for the
going
future,
forward.
for the future, we didn't, so I'm trying to look at sort of consistency. So in this case, if we do that, we're going to be inconsistent in our actions. I still believe, I've kind of lost my place now, but I still believe that the government code section 65995 that the attorney responded to in the letter is, while she has a second interpretation of that language, the first interpretation of that language was that you must increase the developer fee, which would be, and if we did that, the only option that we would have would be to increase to 1.3% based on the 10 Western State Index. So it's a matter of interpretation. She expressed one. There's another that believes that the language is really perfectly clear if you read that section. So I am, not in support of going in the reduction mode, but by doing nothing, then we're going to be somewhat inconsistent. But the other alternative would be to interpret the language in that government code saying that you must increase the fees, and then the only other option to that would be increasing it by the 1.3%. And then there's an argument that would say that we've acted consistently between the two issues as something to consider.
Can I just add, it seems to me, the reason I made the original motion is because it seems to me if you're going to use a certain construction index, you ought to be consistent throughout and not pick or choose for one number versus another. Having said that, even our BIA representative said that, that they can live with whether it's the same or a penny increase or whatever. So I think if we hold it at the same, then we're basically using, we're adopting a philosophy that we're not lowering it, but it's more consistent with the index we applied with the other fee adjustment. I still, my preferred would be to adopt the index and apply it, but I think given that, there's not real opposition, that it would make sense to keep it the same and move on.
Well, the two indexes have been used interchangeably. It's my understanding over time. So
I know they have. I'm just saying consistency makes some sense.
I'm arguing for consistency
Senator Huff?
as well.
Yeah, I'd just like to say, while I don't think BIA had a problem with 1 penny, I think the issue, if I remember their testimony, they wanted some consistency in process, and for that reason, I favor following the 8 cities as we did before. That would result in a penny, which I think either way is probably not that significant, so I won't be supporting the motion.
Okay, the motion is to leave the developer fee where at the current level. So, want to call the roll?
Senator Lowenthal?
Aye.
Senator Hancock? Senator Huff? Assemblymember Fuller? Assemblymember Brownlee? Assemblymember Buchanan? Scott Harvey?
No.
Kathleen Moore?
Aye.
Cynthia Bryant?
Aye.
Carries.
Okay, so agenda, what we have left, is there anything else we have to take up today? Because I sense that people need to leave.
How about moving agenda item 18?
We have an audit, you know.
Process to
report of
follow, as
subcommittee.
amended by Ms. Kaplan.
Yeah. I think. There's like 3 more items left. There's a discussion, all right, who knows what we have left? I'm sorry. I know we have 18, which is the rules. We have 25, which is 22, which is the audit report.
And then you have item 19, which is the audit subcommittee report.
And item
19.
20. Did we do 20?
20, no.
And item 20, which is the regulations.
Is there any opposition to item 20 of the staff recommendation, which is to leave the bifurcation either 3% in kind or adopt 60%? Is there
Wait a
any
minute.
opposition to that?
I think we're, first of all, we're on item 19.
Okay. Fine.
And
18.
18.
we're on item. Why don't we,
18, yeah.
what is the board's pleasure? Should we keep going, or do people want to stop? I think that my sense is that that item, which is the item 19, has a longer discussion. If I read it right, I'm not sure if there's the will to do that tonight, or if we should put that over.
I think it's maybe, if it is the will of the board to put it over to February, make it as, an action item and one of the first that is discussed.
Well, then we need to have a discussion about it, because I don't think we know what the action item would be if we're going to do that, so.
But allow it to be under action, so if board decides to take action, they can do so.
Okay, well, I'd rather leave it as, then let's go ahead and let's go ahead and talk about it a little bit now. Did you want to?
I think some of us have to leave, one member already has.
Yeah.
Is there an immediate danger to life and limb if we hold this over?
No, I don't think so.
No, I don't think so.
I just would like to leave it as a discussion item for the next meeting. Anything else that we have to take up tonight, or should we move to adjournment? Yes, you may.
Because I think we do have someone that may speak, and I apologize for being out of the room. Did you at all address?
Where is that?
Okay. I think there is someone that may speak on the emergency repair program issue.
Okay.
And that's a report. Is there an action item before it? Okay.
There
Does
is,
anybody want to take up that item number 20?
this is a regulation change on modernization, access compliance and modernization.
No.
And it's,
And this went through the implementation committee. There was some, a majority consensus, there was some disagreement, and I believe the one was I gave you information from San Diego Unified. So I think if anybody's here to talk about an opposition, it would be San Diego Unified. But otherwise, option 1 was at the IMP committee. Not a total consensus.
I feel like the board's ready to go, and I feel rushed. I feel like we should put this over. Does anybody object to that notion of putting it over?
No, that's fine. Good.
Okay, all right. And what was someone wanted to comment on the report. Should we go ahead and do that item?
Which one are we talking about?
are you describing emergency repair? Is that what you're
23,
talking
is that
about?
what you thought someone wanted to speak about, Ms. Moore?
It is, and is that true? Yes, is he going to come forward? Before Brooke speaks,
Item 23.
I would like to reiterate, I've dogged this item for about 4 board meetings now, and I continue to have the concern that we have money to expend for emergency repair program, which are our most needy school districts. And I don't understand why we have not been able to utilize the $17.7 million that was transferred from the, and had budget language that supported it. And perhaps someone can speak to that, and I don't know, from Department of Finance. But that's one component of this, and then I think that Brooks wanted to talk about a larger component of it.
Jeannie?
So the reason that we do not have access to those dollars is that the life of an appropriation is valid for 1 year. By the time that we determined that there was money in there and tried to take action, that authority expired. We do not have any legal authority to use that money without an appropriation from the legislature. And that's why in the Budget Act, we are proposing an appropriation for this purpose to cover the balance of what was owed for that year. So unfortunately, we do not have the legal authority to allow folks to expend anything from that account without an appropriation.
Here's where it breaks down for me. We had an appropriation. It indicated up to $101 million. And we expended $50 million. We transferred $50 million of that. It went out to projects. We have a long list of emergency repair projects. We had $17.7 million of 2008-9 money in the reversion account that got transferred. That is 08-09 funding, and it appears to us that money can be expended. We have accruals of funding all the time when we close our books.
The legislature actually retracted the transfer that was made into that account. They took an action to take all but $50 million away. We cannot take an action that's inconsistent with that action, and now we're requesting that they appropriate money for that purpose again to fill the gap between what was provided and what's afforded now. That money sits there, but you cannot spend it without a legal appropriation, and we are not in a position to violate any laws, and I don't think you.
I certainly wouldn't advocate violating any laws. This is the concern. $51 million of the 10-11 budget. It has to make it through that system. It has to be. It's for expenditure for 07-08 authority expenditure. It has to make it through the budgetary process. It has to be approved. That's at the earliest July, if not later. And it has to make it through that process in order to be, and I appreciate that it was placed on there. I know that the Department of Finance said that they would look at correcting that. I still maintain there's $17 million. These are the most high priority projects that we have in our state. And I respect, Jeannie, your interpretation of that. I would ask for us to look at that one more time. If there is any possibility that expenditures can be made from that, if there's another legal interpretation of it, because the authority is there. It was in the Budget Act. The Budget Act removed 10-11 money. It did not remove the 09-08 authority, and is how
Ms. Rapace, as a vehicle, would an urgency bill provide the ability to move that money?
We would need an appropriation, a new valid appropriation from the legislature, because the life of, unless it otherwise specifies, 2 years or 3 years for capital projects, it's a 1-year authority, like any other item in the budget bill. And so that's what we're saying. So you would need a separate appropriation. We put it in the budget, but yes, it could be in any other vehicle.
Mm-hmm. So an urgency bill, we can move through the legislature and it takes effect 90 days after signature from the governor.
And does someone want to speak on this item?
What? Immediately, yes.
From the audience?
I'm sorry, immediately after signature of the governor.
Pretty special session.
Yes, that's right.
The big mic. No, big mic.
Sorry. feels like with the ERP, I always end up in the enviable position of being the one person at the end of the night between everyone and going home. But I really just wanted, on behalf of the Williams plaintiffs, to come before you all and thank you for your continued attention to the emergency repair program issue. We've distributed background information that we think is critical. It talks about the funding history and the number of projects that are in the pipeline. And one of the things that we really want to urge all of you, particularly those of you who are members of the Senate and of the Assembly, is if you all can really serve, because you understand this issue so well, to help educate your colleagues. We really will need the full support of the legislature to try to move forward and continue to live up to both the commitments in the and also really meeting the needs. These needs have been pending, as I put in the background materials, for up to 2 years in our lowest performing schools, and they're quite critical. And I realize this is a time of extremely difficult budget decisions, but I think those of you who sit on the State Allocation Board and understand it so well are best suited to really educate them in terms of the importance of this, even at a time of difficulty in terms of placing priorities. And so we understand that ongoing reversion funds are going to be difficult in an era of flexibility and how we do that. So if we can have some creative thinking about how we address that problem. We have a program that was premised on a reversion account having sufficient funding. It does not look like we will have that moving forward. And so, if there's some creative thinking about how that can be done to try to find other sources of funds to backfill this problem. We are in a situation where we've had no net contributions for 3 years, and that's placed us in this very difficult position where projects are going unfunded. So obviously, we wholeheartedly support one, and hope the legislature backs that fully, and then thinks creatively about how we make future funds available for 10-11. And any information that we can help provide, and a lot of the districts I know are lining up to provide a lot of that information about details there too. And obviously anything can be done, as soon as we can around the $17 million. I think that would help fulfill not only the commitment for the Williams funds to come up with these critical repairs. So we appreciate your attention.
So does the governor's budget indeed ensure that the 51 billion, or excuse me, million?
It includes for the $51 million that would essentially fulfill the 08-09 appropriation. That's right, because at this point we've had
I haven't read the
50
detail
million.
of the language, but it does ensure that based on his proposal.
And I'm sorry, I realized I omitted mentioning my name and affiliation. So my name is Brooks Allen. I'm a staff attorney with the ACLU Foundation of Southern California, and we represent the Williams plaintiffs. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you.
Anything else on that item?
Thank you.
I think everything else on the agenda is just reports, and unless anyone has any questions, entertain. Do you have anything else to add? Then let's
No.
entertain a motion for adjournment. I second it. Oh, wait, I guess I can. No. Okay, this meeting's adjourned.
Very funny.